Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and tomorrow Last of Us 2 launches, ladies and gentlemen. Now, full transparency, I won't really be able to show you gameplay for this, just because of the fact that there are still DMCA issues by Sony, and I'm not going to deal with that. I want to make this video, and I don't want to compromise what I have to say on this video under threat that I may get a DMCA issue. I've been seeing them passed around, and whether they be for memes or showing gameplay before the global launch of Last of Us 2, I don't want to bother risking it. Because I actually bought this game illegally. Full transparency, I have Last of Us 2 Part 2 right here. Yeah, just for extra sake, there's the data install disc. It's a 2-disc affair. I played Horizon Zero Dawn, so yeah, it's the full fucking game, right? Like a 2-discer Last of Us 2. So I have the game, and I've played about 6 hours of this game. Maybe a bit more. But ladies and gentlemen, I feel like that's enough for me to give you a full sort of review of the game. Alright, because let me tell you what I feel about Last of Us 2. And I made a video talking about it a long time ago with the leaks, right? A month ago when those damned leaks came out. And it really didn't paint the game in a good light. If anything, it kind of burnt the bridge from a lot of people who gave a shit about the original game. And there was a whole group of people who were like, well, wait for the whole game to come out. Context means everything. Now, I'm going to just start off by saying that I actually have been digging the story for Last of Us 2. But here's the problem. Last of Us 2 needs to have a cinema mode, meaning that it's a mode where you don't actually play the game, you just watch the game. Because quite frankly, that's pretty much all I'm fucking doing. Now, all for sake, I'm not going to mention spoilers, but if you've watched the leaks, I'm just going to say for the record that I've made it past the golf mission, okay? If you watch the leaks, you know what the fuck I'm talking about. If you haven't, you don't know what I'm talking about. But I made it past a lot of those segments, which actually happen in the first hour to 2 hours of the game. And pretty much the rest of this game's storyline is your standard revenge story. Now, I've been seeing some reviews where people are comparing this game to the grittiness of something like Schindler's List or whatever the fuck it is. I feel like the reviews are just way overblown for this game. For instance, this game is dark. Yeah, it is. Obviously, it's a post-apocalyptic zombie game. It's dark. The original game was dark too. But it is your average revenge storyline set in the post-apocalyptic universe. And sure, there are some twists and turns to be had so far. Like I said, I'm 6 hours into the game. I still want to say that I'm in that first act, halfway through the first act type of deal, so I still have much more of the game to explore. But that is what it is. The story is dark, and it's intriguing to the point where I want to play more of it for sure. Like, I want to finish the storyline. I think that's a pretty strong point of the game, and obviously that was the big selling point of Last of Us 2, the fucking storyline. I think if you like the Last of Us story, Last of Us 2 so far seems to be pretty damn good. Now, I've heard that a lot of reviewers out there are not able to talk about the last, 6-7 hours of the game, the last act of it. I guess this is where, a big chunk of gameplay, not gameplay changes, but a big chunk of this, controversial story change happens that we saw in the leak. And maybe Sony wants to keep that under wraps because it's such a big reveal that they don't want it to be spoiled. Obviously, Last of Us Part 2 is not a game that you're going to be replaying over and over and over again, unless you really like to, beat it on harder difficulties or level up your character or level up to the max abilities you can. You're not really going to be replaying it. It's one of those movie games, right? You're going to be sitting there, you're going to play through the story once, and that's probably going to be it for 90% of the people. Now, this is where I want to talk about the fucking gameplay, because I have been blown away. I feel like I'm completely disconnected from a lot of review circles out there, and I just don't understand how some people have touted this game's gameplay to immense, massive extremes. Now, to say that for the least, okay, if I'm going to rate the game as a whole, Last of Us, I'd have to give it a 7 out of 10. Very good movie, very good story. If this was a Netflix series, if this was on Netflix, the production value, the cinematography, the actual value that went into creating the cutscenes, all of that, I would give it a fucking high praise, 9, 10. It is without a doubt one of the most pretty looking games. Graphically, it's insane. And I just played Horizon Zero Dawn. That game is graphics king to me. So if this game is on par with that, good for you. Realistic, good visuals, the sound is great, cinematography is amazing. And all of that is great. Like I said, if this was a Netflix television show, yeah, I'd watch it. I'd binge it. But that's when you get into the game part of this game, right? The gameplay section. And unfortunately, I have to say, I don't understand because the game is quite literally the exact same game from Last of Us 1. Like, if you thought there were going to be massive gameplay changes, I'm just going to fucking burst your bubble real quick. Let me go over the innovations in gameplay. You can prone, you can jump, you can sprint jump, and that's it. That's fucking it. Like, I'm sorry to say that. I guess no, swimming was in the original game. So yeah, as far as I played, there's 3 massive gameplay changes. In the 6 hours I've played, I've met 1 new enemy, which isn't really a whole new enemy because it's like a mix of another enemy from the previous game. So yeah, there's just not a whole lot of change going forward. If you played Last of Us in 2013, expect a very memorable ride going forward if we're talking about the gameplay perspective. Not a whole heck of a lot changes. And for fair understanding, I didn't expect the gameplay to change dramatically. What we saw at E3, it was fine. It was the moment-to-moment set-piece level gameplay that we expected from Naughty Dog stuff anyways. I wasn't fucking surprised by any of that. So let me just put that as blatantly as I can. This isn't an open world game, it's a linear game. And this is where I run into one problem with these linear as hell games right now. I liked FF7 Remake, but if it's something that I have to say about FF7 Remake, is that the FF7 Remake is a very linear affair. Like, when you play that game, you effectively go into a straight line. We always like to joke about Final Fantasy 13, Final Corridor 13, but that game is basically a straight beeline, and like maybe 2-3 points in the story do you ever get into like this open world segment where you can do a couple other things off the beaten path. And that's roughly the same experience that I've been having with Last of Us Part 2. It's a beeline game, like meaning the game literally tells you where to go. The first hour or 2 is a fucking walking simulator. It's a full walking simulator. You're just going from point to point, and any encounter you have is like, hey, here's 3 enemies on the screen. Kill them, or run from them, or use guns, and then go to the next encounter, which is 3 more enemies. Sometimes you have these scenarios where you're like sprinting, darting through, and it's fine, it's cool, I appreciate it, but nothing has dramatically changed. The game is what it is. So expect it from a gameplay perspective what you've got into it. Now, sometimes you do get into the open world segments, which is why I compare it to FF7 Remake, where the game gives you like this section of open area to sort of explore to your heart's content, and it'll give you a map, and you can basically find like key moments on a map, like key points of interest, and you can go there, scavenge for supplies, but eventually the game just tells you, hey, get back on the linear beeline again, and that's just how it is. That's Last of Us 2. You know, it is what it is. Does it play functionally well? Absolutely. You know, I think if anybody's out here saying that it plays like shit is a little wrong. Like, it plays fine. It plays absolutely great. But in this generation, we've seen plenty of games come out that have this linear style of gameplay, the story-driven gameplay that can be engaging. You know, I played Days Gone not too long ago, and it's another zombie game, and the storyline may not be the most intriguing for me in that game at all, but I'll say the gameplay from a zombie game perspective is actually pretty damn decent. If you haven't played Days Gone, I'd recommend it. You can pick it up pretty cheap, and I guess, in a way, I kind of expected Last of Us Part 2 to be a little more open-ended and, I don't know, maybe more like that. The AI in this game, the gameplay, it's just not evolved past the original game. You know, I look at something like Resident Evil 2 Remake, another zombie game, Resi 3 Remake, and I realize that, yeah, you can have a story-driven game. You can have a linear-as-hell story-driven game if we just take Resident Evil 3 Remake, but you can still add compelling enough gameplay that, you know, it doesn't have to be the straight beeline movie experience that you're watching. And yeah, sure, maybe they're different games at the end of the day by different developers, but I still feel that that's almost no excuse. So yeah, that's really what I've been getting out of Last of Us Part 2. I've been looking at a lot of reviews giving this game nearly hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds. And I'll tell you this, at first glance, I can kind of see that. There's definitely been a lot of love that's went into Last of Us Part 2. And if you're watching, if you're into this for the whole like story experience, the movie experience, the trademark Naughty Dog cinematic experience, I don't think they'll ever let you down. This is probably the best that they've ever made when it comes to like just the cinematography, the sound, the graphics, and all that. Obviously, to be expected, this is their most latest game, and Naughty Dog constantly pushes the boundaries that they set for themselves per game. But when we're looking at a gameplay experience, like the fucking raw dog gameplay, Last of Us 2 has not changed at all from the original Last of Us. And even with that said, yes, it's functionally playable. Very well playable. I mean, I'm not complaining about that at all. What I am saying is in 2020, this game, identically mirrors its 2013 predecessor. You know, if I was to put Last of Us Remastered and Last of Us 2 next to each other, aside from the visual change, right, the visual graphical change, which, trust me, you'll notice, like, the graphics in 2 are amazing. Aside from all of that, the gameplay you'll not really notice any change on. It's a very, very similar experience going forward. But yeah, that's really Last of Us Part 2. As far as the storyline goes, these leaks, I've only seen, like I said, the golfing segment of the game. I haven't seen all the other leaks that I've seen in prior, but hopefully with how the story's going forward 6 hours into the game, maybe that context exists to actually make it a really, really thrilling revenge story. I can kind of see what Naughty Dog is trying to pull from its leaks, and to an extent I kind of wish I hadn't seen them, because I would have liked to seen it from a fresh perspective. But, you know, it is what it is. I hope going forward, because this is a 20 to 25 hour experience, by the end of it, I hope Last of Us Part 2 really wins me over in the story department, because like I said in this video, the gameplay department hasn't exactly been winning me over. If anything, the only thing that makes it sort of a trudge to play through, a sludge really, is the gameplay. That's why I said in the beginning, if this game had a cinema mode where all I did was watch the game, yeah, I'd probably do that. And I guess with that, I can kind of tell you is, if you're into Last of Us, and if you really want to play the story experience, the $60, maybe it's worth it to you. It's a 20-25 hour game. If you do the math, that's a couple bucks an hour. Not a bad deal. There's definitely going to be replayability if you want to beat it on a harder difficulty. If you want to go for collectibles, if you want to go for like maxing out your character's stats, sure, that's there. That's fine and dandy. There's no multiplayer or anything, so if you were a fan of factions from the previous game, it doesn't exist here, or at least not before launch. But yeah, that's really all I have to talk to about Last of Us Part 2. The gameplay might be the only thing sludging me down, and that's just a goddamn shame. If I had to rate this game, I think IGN Japan's review is fair, 70 out of 100, which I think is still a fairly good review, because there's a lot of high points for the game, but I'm sorry, if I'm playing a video game, the gameplay has to be pretty much up there. It has to be top tier. If your gameplay isn't compelling enough, I don't know. I think the final point to make here is, this is just from my perspective, right? You can have a game with a bad story, right? Like Metal Gear Solid 5 is a game that I believe wholeheartedly has a bad story, but it has really good gameplay. Sometimes good gameplay can save an absolute terrible storyline. Sometimes, not always. But it's very hard to have a great story but almost sluggish gameplay or dated gameplay that won't really be easily carrying you through the entire experience. But that's really my whole deal with Last of Us Part 2. Not a bad game, but I don't understand the 100 out of 100 you're getting out of it. I think 70 out of 100 is probably the fair review to give it. Gameplay dated, but the storyline compelling enough for me to get back to. Like I said, I'm going to finish the game, and maybe I'll make another video talking about it. I definitely should be streaming this tonight. That being said, though, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.